This happened to my child, whom I could never imagine.
Once the opportunity to get rid of Phil was brought up, I thought that all my problems would go away.
When you take someone's life, you should not have a life.
Two 12-year-old boys and a 15-year-old boy to plan a murder plot in the park one day is very bizarre.
They were sitting there waiting with the guns ready to shoot.
They shot him right in the face.
Being involved with something like this.
Why did you feel that you needed to get rid of him?
In 2010, Colt Lundy and Paul Gingerich made a decision that would haunt them forever. The legal drama that unfolded will keep you at the edge of your seat. Let's find out what fate awaited the boys. Escape from stepfather. It was a crime that rocked the small town of Cromwell, Indiana. On a dark night in April 2010, two boys, Colt Lundy and Paul Gingerich, made a decision that would forever change their lives. Colt was just 15 years old at the time, and Paul was even younger, only 12. But age didn't stop them from taking matters into their own hands. They were planning to run away to Arizona with the goal of selling t-shirts to drug dealers. But before they could do that, Colt believed he had to do something first: slay his stepfather, Philip Danner. According to police reports, there were no signs of exploitation between Danner and Lundy, but Colt later revealed that his stepfather was verbally and physically abusive towards him when he was drunk. The hurt became too much for Colt to handle, and he decided to take matters into his own hands. On the night of April 20, 2010, Colt and Paul climbed through a window of Lundy's bedroom in his family's home in the Enchanted Hills neighborhood of Cromwell. They grabbed two of the many guns Danner had stashed around the house and waited for him in the living room. As Danner walked into the living room, he saw the two boys with guns pointed at him. All he had time to say was, "What the fuck?" before each boy fired two bullets into his body, slaying Danner instantly.
But it is actually what happened. Two 12-year-old boys and a 15-year-old boy to plan a murder plot in the park one day is very bizarre.
They were sitting there waiting with the guns ready to shoot.
They shot him right in the face.
After the slaying, the boys quickly gathered up a few things, including Danner's wallet, a handgun, and some marijuana a friend gave them, and jumped into Danner's car. They then headed west on a cross-country trip that ended when they were stopped by a police officer in Peru, Illinois. It wasn't long before the boys were arrested and charged with slaying.
This happened to my child, whom I could never imagine. Colt was 15. Paul Henry had just turned 12.
Once the opportunity to get rid of Phil was brought up, I thought that all my problems would go away.
When you take someone's life, you should not have a life.
Being involved with something like this.
Why did you feel that you needed to get rid of him?
Paul, who was believed to be the youngest person in Indiana ever sentenced as an adult, received a 30-year sentence. Colt, who was charged as an adult, received a 25-year sentence. It was a crime that left the small town of Cromwell reeling. Few could understand what could cause two people so young to commit such a heinous crime.
They had no idea what the repercussions would be if they got caught. I believe they never thought that they were going to. We're going to kill him and then we're going to go to jail for the rest of our lives. I feel like they knew what they were doing was wrong, but I don't think that their minds are even developed enough to know.
But as the details of Colt's home life emerged, it became clear that he was in a very unique situation at home. According to Detective John Colby, we have substantial evidence of what that home life was like. Colt's stepfather may not have left visible marks on his body, but the emotional scars were deep and lasting. As for Paul, his life was going to be very different from that of Colt Lundy. Paul was just a child when he was involved in the crime, and it's likely that he was influenced by Colt's strong personality. But now, he faced a long sentence in prison with little hope of ever being released. It was a tragic end to a senseless crime. Two boys, once full of innocence and promise, now faced a future behind bars, and a family was left to pick up the pieces after losing a beloved husband and father. Combined trial. The boys, Colt Lundy and Paul Gingerich, appeared in adult court as prosecutors sought to combine their cases into one trial, but their defense attorneys argued that this would violate the boys' constitutional rights. Lundy's attorney, David Colby, argued that while the facts of the case were the same, the boys' culpability was different due to their age difference. He maintained that to combine their cases before a single jury would deprive them of a fair trial. Gingerich's attorney also argued that the boys had different levels of planning and intentions, with different thoughts about whether the shooting was intentional, accidental, or justified. Despite the expense of separate trials, Colby asserted that the constitutional right to a fair trial was paramount and that a joint trial would set up possible grounds for an appeal in the event of a conviction. The judge postponed a decision on whether to combine the cases until the next hearing. Meanwhile, Lundy and Gingerich remained in the Kosciuszko County Jail, sharing a cell since they were waived to adult court. To keep them separated from adult inmates, meals were brought to their cell, and they were under constant surveillance with jailers checking on them every 30 minutes.
I could get away with just sitting in my bed all day, watching TV, doing nothing else. It's just much more somber there. Older crowd. Ramen noodles for 2.5 years straight, every day.
Remember, I hated beef when I got here.
By myself, just quiet, just lay down. I think about, what I did very often, about every day, just anytime I'm just sitting here, whatever just that comes to me, just automatically, that's the first thing in my mind.
They passed their time with schoolwork and games from the library. The town was abuzz with the news of the crime and the upcoming trial. Many wondered what could have led two boys to commit such a violent act and whether justice could be served in a fair and unbiased trial. The fate of the boys hung in the balance, and the community watched on with bated breath as the legal drama unfolded. Lundy's request. In October 2018, Colt Lundy appeared in court to request a modification of his sentence. Lundy had served 8 years of his 30-year sentence and was asking the judge to allow him to serve the remainder of his term on home detention. He argued that he had done everything he could to better himself during his time in prison, from completing apprenticeships to obtaining a higher education degree and counseling.
What's the ratio of miles to gallon of gas?
I wanted the people to look at me and think, I don't want to mess with that dude. And when I started going to college, my first semester was horrible. I want to be as well-rounded as possible. I got like a handful of grammar books and just read them cover to cover like 3 times a piece.
Despite the opposition of the family of Phil Danner, the man Lundy slayed, and the prosecutor, Lundy's lawyer and the director of Kosciuszko County Community Corrections, attested to his exemplary conduct and remarkable efforts at reforming himself.
I just sat down and started writing.
Of poetry.
I just started reading it and I was like, you know what? I can do this. The setting sun, a beautiful beacon of hope for another beautiful day to come, finally leaves us. A man or a monster? That seems to be the debate. One act of impetuosity and his life was taken away, giving us its last colorful kiss.
Lundy's lawyer claimed that he had shown remorse from day one, while the director of the Kosciuszko County Community Corrections acknowledged that Lundy had gone above and beyond to reform himself. The prosecuting attorney, Brad Voles, raised concerns about where Lundy would live if he were allowed to serve his sentence on home detention, and noted that statutes prevented sentences for certain charges, like slaying, from being modified into home detention. However, the judge gave Voles and Lundy's attorney 10 days to file briefs on whether the modification should be allowed. Ultimately, the judge granted Lundy's request, allowing him to finish his sentence on home detention starting from March 15 of 2019. Lundy never pursued a second trial under the new system. After completing his term, he was put on probation. Now that he has been released from prison, Lundy can continue his efforts to reform himself and live a productive life as a member of society. Gingerich's sentence. In the aftermath of the slaying, both boys were charged with conspiracy to commit slaying and were sentenced to serve 25 years in prison. At the time, many people believed that the sentences were too severe, especially given the ages of the defendants. Gingerich was sent to the Pendleton Juvenile Correctional Facility to serve his sentence, while Lundy was sent to the Wabash Valley Correctional Facility. For nearly 7 years, Gingerich lived behind bars, separated from his family and the world he knew. Despite the challenges he faced, he was determined to make the most of his time in prison, to learn from his mistakes, and to find a way to turn his life around. He attended classes and participated in programs designed to help him deal with the trauma of his past and to develop the skills he would need to build a better future.
I know it's gonna be harder for my life if I don't get my credits and my diploma. I come right back.
Paul is still serving an adult sentence.
Most of these kids, they don't even try in school. They just kind of shrug it off. They just get out and
At some point, if nothing changes, he will eventually be moved from a juvenile facility to an adult facility. Simply determined that the most appropriate placement for him is a juvenile facility as opposed to an adult facility.
Despite the progress he made, Gingrech's release from prison was far from certain. Even with credits for good behavior, his sentence could have kept him locked up until his mid-20s.
When I first saw him, he looked like he was 9 years old. He's one of the most well-behaved kids here in the unit, then a negative. Crime doesn't match his personality at all. Say a student will say, hey, you're in here for murder, and he'll be like, yeah, that's it. He's more of a role model on my unit. Doesn't talk about who it was or how it happened or anything like that.
With some of that time likely spent in an adult prison. But the efforts of child advocates and juvenile justice activists helped to change the system that had sentenced him so harshly. Paul's Law. Their lobbying efforts resulted in a new law dubbed Paul's Law, passed in 2013, that gave Indiana courts greater flexibility in deciding juvenile sentences. Under the new law, Judge James Hewer agreed to monitor Gingrech's progress toward rehabilitation in juvenile prison until his release several years later. Finally, in March of 2017, Paul Henry Gingrech was released from prison. He returned to the world as a changed person, determined to build a new life for himself and to make amends for the harm he had caused. He was required to wear a GPS monitoring device on his ankle and be tracked 24 hours a day until July 2018, and the court's supervision continued until February 2020, when he began 10 years of probation. Today, Gingrech is living with his mother in Fort Wayne and is working hard to rebuild his life. He is undergoing 24-hour electric monitoring and close supervision by the courts, but he remains determined to make the most of the second chance he has been given. Paul Henry Gingrech's story is a powerful reminder of the consequences of crime and the importance of second chances. It is a story of a young person who made a terrible mistake, but who refused to let that mistake define him. Through hard work, determination, and the support of others, he was able to find a way to move beyond his past and to build a brighter future for himself.
Now, I'm 5'9", 160 pounds, all muscle. Years ago, I was 5'2", 155 pounds, no muscle. I went from 2 pull-ups to 33, 15 push-ups to 100. I will do something big with my life, and I want to show the world an ex-con screw-up in a lot of people's eyes can change, and I hope they believe me. To the Danner family, I'm very sorry.
That's all for today, folks. See you next time.